all I believe. Justice be my guide as I seek my way. Lead me into this tender day. Speak through me in all I do and say. Watch and famine ride the swift winds of chance. Sorrow and pleasure seem united in dance. Lamb of life, may this bread I leave mingle compassion with all I believe. Mercy be my guide as I seek my way. Lead me into this tender day. Speak through me in all I do and say.
Good morning. Our story for all ages this morning is Learning by Heart, the story of Sophia Lyon-Fahs, written by Polly Peterson. Mama, why do we just keep going and not going anywhere? Asked little Sophie. Her family was crossing the wide Pacific Ocean on a big ship bound for America. Sophie Lyon was an American girl, 3.5 years old, making her first trip to America. She and her older brothers and sisters had all been born in China, where their father was an evangelical Christian minister and their mother had started a school for Chinese girls. When they made that long trip to America in 1880, Sophie's parents thought their family would go back to China after 1 year. But the plans changed, and Sophie never returned to China. As she grew up, her memories of China grew dim. But she hoped when she grew up, she could go to other countries as a Christian teacher, like her parents. In college, Sophie joined a club for young people who also wanted to become Christian teachers. She met another devoted volunteer named Harvey Foss. They began writing letters to each other and made plans to travel and teach together. 6 years later, they were married. But instead of traveling to another country, Sophie and Harvey moved to New York City. Harvey had a job, and Sophia Lyon-Fahs taught Sunday school and continued her studies, excited about the new ideas she was learning. Sophia and Harvey's first child was born in 1904. And in those days, many women gave up their outside work after they became mothers. But Sophia was determined to keep learning and to keep teaching Sunday school, and she did. As it turned out, being a mother also helped Sophia learn. She learned about children from being with her own children and listening to their ideas and questions. When her children asked questions, Sophia tried her best to answer them. Her children had very interesting questions like, where does snow come from? And where are we born? As she tried to answer her children's questions, Sophia learned how much she didn't know. You might think not having all the answers took away Sophia's faith, but it was the opposite. She started to believe that to have a strong faith, finding questions you really care about is just as important as finding answers. One time, when Sophia taught a religious education class, she told a lively story about a real person who had been a Christian teacher in another country. The children were eager to hear the story and eager to talk about it, like her own children at home. The children asked questions, the interesting kind of questions that let Sophia know they were thinking and learning. Sophia's ideas about religion changed over time. As a young person, she had thought Christianity was the one true religion and people all over the world should learn Bible stories. She grew to realize the Bible was not the only book with truth in it. She collected stories from all over the world filled with truth and beauty to help children's spirits stretch and grow. She published the stories in a book called From Long Ago and Many Lands. In those days, when most adults thought children's minds were like empty jars to fill with learning, Sophia thought differently. She thought children were more like gardens, already planted with seeds of possibility for learning and growing. She thought a teacher's job was to provide the good soil and water and sunlight a garden needs to grow. In a religious school, a teacher could help children grow in their spirit and faith. When she was 82 years old, Sophia became a Unitarian minister. Her own life was a great example of her belief that every person in a congregation should continue to learn and grow, from the smallest child to the oldest adult. Sophia Faz lived a long, long time, 102 years, and she never stopped learning new things. If she were alive today and came to visit us, Sophia Faz would want to know about our experiences and how they have helped us learn and grow. She would want to know what stories we have read and how they've helped us to awaken our spirits. She would want to know how we ask questions, seek answers, and learn from each other. Imagine how happy she would be to see us watering one another's seeds of spiritual growth today.
Our faith is but a single gem upon a rosary of beads, the thread of truth which runs through them supports our varied human needs. Confucian wisdom, Christian care, the Buddhist way of self-control, the Muslim's daily call to prayer are proven pathways to the goal. From many lips in every age, the truth eternal is proclaimed by Western saint and Eastern sage, and all the good, however named. Beside the nobles of our race, alive as yet cannot compare, may we at length their truth embrace, and in their sacred mission share.
Now is the time in our Sunday worship when we share our joys and concerns. We do this by sharing them in the chat. You're welcome to share a joy or a concern in the chat. And I will offer us a prayer as we continue in that spirit of togetherness. I want to first reflect to everyone that it is exactly 2 years ago that we began meeting virtually. 2 years ago, we didn't know what the next 2 years would hold in terms of the COVID-19 experience. We didn't know what the next 2 years would hold in terms of politics, and we didn't know what the next 2 years would hold in terms of the world. We still don't know what the next 2 years will hold. And so I would like to offer this prayer. Spirit of life, God, Goddess, Holy One, we're gathered here today as one of many Unitarian Universalist communities. We're gathered here today intentionally to share with each other, to be part of each other's experience, and to let one another know that we are not alone in this world. That even if we are presented with moments such as we were 2 years ago, when we recognized we would need to meet virtually and not have the warmth of each other's presence physically with each other, we need not be starved for the warmth of each other's presence on this planet in a virtual way. As we prepare to start coming back together, Spirit, hold us, give us patience, give us the way to hold each other and to not hold each other, to ask permission. It's been a long time. But let us all and every one of us know that the Spirit is in us, that our faith is strong, that regardless of what any of the next 2 years hold, we are together in this. We'll hold silence for a short time while the joys and concerns continue to come in. We light this first candle for all of the joys, the second candle for the concerns, and a third candle for those joys and concerns that everyone is still holding in their hearts. May you all be blessed.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Oh, in the rise in the sea, move in the hand, living light, the shape of justice, roots of ethos, wings and lifting, Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Fuente de amor, ven hacia mí, y al corazón, cántale tu compasión. Sopla volar, sube el mar, hasta mollar la justicia de la vida. Arraigame, líbrame, ven de amor, ven a mí, ven a mí.
I know I'm not alone in wanting to avoid the news these days. It's quite enough that we've been living with a completely upside down world for the last 2 years. It is also enough that in that time, we've dealt with not only isolation and inexplicable death, but also the amplification of the ongoing reckoning with race in this country, as well as the steady implosion of reason, it would seem, as we watch the right to individual rights eroded and weakened in the shadow of dysfunctional government. We're turning into a vision of a country that none of us truly wants to live in, or maybe we do. Maybe this is just who we are. And now, the very real threat of a war that teeters every day on becoming a global conflict. The constant existential crisis is wearing on me, on us. It is often too much to face. I suppose that's partly why we're here on a Sunday morning when we could be hiding under the covers. I've often thought that the human tendency toward war is also the reason for the human tendency toward faith. It is in times like this that we look to this kind of community for a touchstone, even if it is brief or casual, that reminds us of something constant, familiar, somehow unshaken by the world, even if everyone entering the space is carrying that burden. Our faith is being asked to carry a great load right now, and it will be asked to carry more. And it is as a minister of this faith, I have to ask, and I have to ask you to ask yourselves, is Unitarian Universalism enough? In some of my more critical personal journaling, I have often referred to Unitarian Universalism as God for the good life, meaning that Unitarian Universalist practices are great when you have security such that you're able to share sometimes your actual wealth or your time or voice to help those who are less fortunate. We can gather to share our theologies of Harry Potter and recollection of places we travel with no restriction. These are all good things, born of a good life. While at the same time, Unitarian Universalism often has little promise to offer the lived experience of real marginalization, systemic violence, and no original language of comfort in the experience of war. In conversation with my many colleagues from other faith traditions, although they hold no animosity toward Unitarian Universalism, they are consistent in not understanding how Unitarian Universalism answers human failure, pain, and suffering. The 7 principles describe desired outcomes, but they do not give life to how to get to those outcomes. Are we just supposed to know? The 6 sources are a fantastic library of hope, but we regularly look to them without an informed guide as to how to discern them. We cherry pick and throw out the pits, forgetting that the pits are where the growth begins. Are we mature enough in our faith to face a war? Are we willing to give voice to what we think is right or wrong? I think the reason there are some folks who resist the 8th principle is because it actually does this. It is extremely instructive and draws a clear line in the sand. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. There is no gray area. It is clear. You're either with me or against me. And still, in truth, we do get a great deal done in the name of Unitarian Universalism. We're able to mobilize voting, activate communities around local and statewide issues, contribute our voices to important positions and acts of justice around the globe. What we do is important. And just as important is the 3 a.m. terror that everything is coming to a horrible and uncontrollable end, the fear that the medication isn't working, the crushing feeling that we are not loved. For most of us, in an everyday life, justice, policy, advocacy, and social awareness, though all of them are immensely important, they are also largely conceptual. It does make us feel good when these things that we believe in move to our will. They're big picture emotions in the world that matter. At the same time, these same important things may not change the way some of us are unable to pay rent or mourn a loved one who served in the military, or face our children or grandchildren when we think we've failed them. In addition to the big ticket stuff, we must also search for the everyday Unitarian Universalism that can hold us through these personal times as well. Not just the conceptual times, but the operational human times of crisis and doubt. The times when we want to return to joy, but we don't know how to get there. We must search for the Unitarian Universalism that lives from the place of marginalization and holds on to Martin Luther King Jr.'s promise that none of us is free until all of us are free. We must search for the Unitarian Universalism that prioritizes self-advocacy and offers humility to bear witness in back, not always be the warrior out front. Search for a Unitarian Universalism that has an internalized awareness of coexistence. Searching for a Unitarian Universalism that is as operational as it is conceptual. For me, this means a Unitarian Universalism that explores generative as opposed to destructive language. Let's stop slapping each other on the wrist and live the change that is possible now. Let go of the language of what we don't want and start talking about what we do want: liberation, joy, equity, wholeness. It means having an analysis and practice of non-toxic whiteness that goes beyond dismantling white supremacy and finds peace with what whiteness has been, is, and can be. Not post-racial, but bringing a de-weaponized whole and equal whiteness into the shared human diaspora. It means doing away with colonial-era congregational polity and inward-facing isolationist communities and building new governance that includes the priorities and sensibilities of the full diversity of Unitarian Universalist populations from the ground up. It means replacing the hymnal with a multidisciplinary liturgical resource that isn't just welcoming to diversity, but one that is actually built from and by diverse voices of music and all creative arts together. It means making leadership accessible beyond expensive education and performative historical formalities. It means embracing a language of love that generates from new principles grown out of the experience of and aspiration to liberation. What these ways of being can point toward in this broken, hurting world is a mature inner life, not constrained by thinking or doing the same thing, but actively lived in the world from the smallest to the largest interaction and issue. And guess what? All of this is possible for us right now. We can do this today. because Unitarian Universalism is not bound or held prisoner to its past by doctrine or creed. We can be this fountain of unbridled sustenance right now. Why is this important? Human beings will always make war. It would seem that we are presently leaving the most peaceful extended period of time in modern humanity. Although many horrific conflicts, diseases, and wars have arisen through that time, deliberate human-made mass extinction events were thought to be a thing of the past after August of 1945. Dropping a bomb that incinerated thousands of innocent human beings seemed like the extent of cruelty that we as human beings were capable of. It was not. And our faith, Unitarian Universalism, born in 1961, has never been truly tested by direct involvement in war. The closest we came was Vietnam, which completely divided our congregations, not a good sign. As I'm with you here today, I don't believe Unitarian Universalism as a denomination is consciously or intentionally ready for modern war from a theological perspective. We need to do some deep searching and coming together over what our answer is to global conflict. We need to get in spiritual shape to make it. It can't just be the big political stuff. No matter how important and urgent those actions and voicing our opinions are, we must also tend to the small and intimate parts of how human conflict touches each of us and how our sleepless nights take over. We must ask more of our faith now in this time of crisis. We must ask this so that we're well rested in order to be in the fight on all levels. Crisis will always come. The Trump presidency was one kind of war. COVID was and is another. But actual bullets and intentional murder for national gain with the potential for wider violence is something else altogether. In the midst of what may come, we must ask, is Unitarian Universalism enough? And so I invite you to imagine a Unitarian Universalism that holds human liberation in its heart as the antidote to our equal human tendency to war. A Unitarian Universalism that sees our differences as the call to community and trusts all of the variations of race, sex, body, mind, and heart as much as the basic human will to live. A Unitarian Universalism that isn't ashamed, embarrassed, or shy about naming love as the transcendent power to be in this world, as something that we all have a right to do. This is a Unitarian Universalism that is not just enough, but it is a Unitarian Universalism that will let us sleep at 3 a.m. Is Unitarian Universalism enough? It sure as hell can be. And it's up to us to make it so. Amen. And blessed be.
Let this be a house of peace, of nature. scientists and mystics abide in reverence here. Let this be our house, a house of our creation, where works of art and melodies consecrate our atmosphere. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of prophecy. Be vision for our children, be our common theme. Let this be our house of myth and lore and legend, our trove of ancient story and cradles of our tender dreams. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace. Let this be a house of peace.
I invite everyone to unmute themselves and join us in extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Now what?